Ryan's breath caught as his eyes adjusted to the darkness inside the trunk. There, curled up against the cold metal, was a woman. Her skin looked pale, her lips dry and cracked, her body wrapped in nothing more than a thin blanket. She was trembling too weak to even lift her head. The only sign she was alive was the faint, shallow rise and fall of her chest. Ryan's jaw tightened. "What the hell?" he muttered, his deep voice breaking the silence. He turned his gaze to the little girl. Who is she? What's going on here? The girl's lips quivered. Her small hands clenched at the hem of her dress. "She's my mom," the girl whispered. Her voice cracked like she hadn't spoken in days. "She hasn't eaten in 2 days. I tried to ask for food, but she's too weak to even stand." Ryan froze. The words hit him harder than he expected. Her mom. He looked back at the woman the sharp angles of her face, the way her bones seemed too close to her skin. She wasn't just sick, she was starving. The girl's voice trembled again. They told us to leave the shelter. Said they couldn't keep us anymore. We don't have anywhere else to go." Ryan felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Pity, guilt, no, something deeper. A memory, a flash of himself at 12 years old, standing outside in the rain, his mother clutching his hand, begging for a place to stay after his father abandoned them. He had sworn back then that he'd never feel helpless again, that he would build a life where no one could throw him away. And he'd built an empire, a name feared in the corporate world. But somewhere along the way, he'd buried the boy who once knew what it felt like to be this little girl. Ryan pulled off his black tuxedo jacket and draped it over the girl's shoulders. She flinched at first, then clutched the warm fabric like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Stay here," Ryan said, his voice softer now, though still steady. He leaned into the trunk and slid his arms under the weak woman, lifting her effortlessly. She was frighteningly light, like she weighed no more than the coat he'd just given away. The girl's eyes widened. Where are we going?" Ryan met her gaze, his own expression unreadable but firm. "To get your mother help," he said simply. Then, after a pause, he added, "and to make sure neither of you has to beg ever again." The girl blinked up at him, not fully understanding what those words meant, but sensing, somehow, that for the first time in a long time, they were safe. The hum of Ryan's sleek car filled the silence as they sped through the sleeping city. The little girl sat in the back seat, clutching his jacket around her shoulders, her wide eyes darting between her unconscious mother and the stranger driving them. Ryan glanced at the rearview mirror. The girl's face reminded him of something, or rather, someone. Her round cheeks, those sky-blue eyes, the way she sat quietly despite the chaos around her. It hit him suddenly. She looked like his mother, not the strong, vibrant woman from his early childhood, but the woman she had become after his father walked out tired, frail, yet fiercely protective. He remembered how she used to smile through the pain, how she would tell him, "Someday, Ryan, you'll help people who have no one." He had forgotten those words long ago, buried beneath years of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. Now, as he glanced at the fragile woman lying beside the girl, something inside him shifted. When they arrived at his glass-walled penthouse, the doorman nearly froze, seeing his usually polished, untouchable boss step out carrying a weak, unconscious woman and guiding a barefoot child. Ryan ignored the stares inside. The warmth of the penthouse wrapped around them. The little girl's eyes widened at the sight of the sprawling space, the tall windows, the glowing city skyline, the marble floors that stretched farther than the shelter's entire kitchen. But she didn't smile. She only looked at her mother, whispering softly, "Please wake up, Mama, please." Ryan immediately called his private doctor, who rushed over within the hour. As they worked to stabilize the woman hydration for food supplements, oxygen, the girl sat quietly on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest. Ryan approached her. For once, he didn't know what to say. Words weren't his strength deals, and negotiations were. But this wasn't a deal. "What's your name?" he asked finally. The girl looked up, her small voice barely above a whisper. "Emma?" "And your mother?" "Sophie." Ryan nodded slowly. People always say that, but they leave. They always leave. Something sharp pierced Ryan's chest. That sentence, he had said those exact words to his mother when he was a boy. He remembered the ache of being abandoned, the crushing fear of being disposable. And here was this child, speaking the same pain he once felt. Ryan knelt down so his eyes were level with hers. "I'm not leaving," he said, voice firm. "Not now, not ever." For the first time, Emma's eyes softened as he stood and turned. Back toward the bedroom where Sophie was resting, Ryan knew something with absolute clarity. This wasn't just charity. This wasn't just guilt. This was fate. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, helping Sophie and Emma felt like fulfilling a promise he made years ago to a mother who had prayed that her son would never forget the broken. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the penthouse, breaking through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sophie stirred on the bed, her eyelids fluttering open. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The softness of the mattress, the scent of fresh linen, the faint sound of the city below, all felt surreal, like a dream. Then, panic struck. She pushed herself up weakly, her voice raspy. "Emma! Emma!" Before fear could tighten its grip, a small figure rushed in from the living room. "Mama!" Emma ran to her side, climbing onto the bed and clutching her tightly. "You're awake!" Relief flooded Sophie's fragile face as she held her daughter close. Her gaze finally drifted to the tall man standing a few feet away. His hands in his pockets, his sharp suit replaced by a simple shirt and slacks. His presence was commanding, but not threatening. "You!" Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. "Who are you? Why? Why are we here?" Ryan's expression softened slightly. "My name is Ryan Cole. I found you both last night. You were in bad shape. I brought you here so you could recover." Sophie's brow furrowed as she studied him. The name sounded familiar, but her mind was still hazy. "Cole, as in the company." He gave a small nod. "Yes." Her lips parted in disbelief. Billionaires didn't rescue strangers from parking lots. They didn't carry half-conscious women into their penthouses. "Why would you help us?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion and exhaustion. Ryan hesitated. "The answer wasn't simple. Because you remind me of my mother. Because I see myself in your daughter. Because something in me broke last night, and I can't ignore it anymore." But all he said was, "Because I could, and because I should." Before Sophie could reply, a voice cut through the room. "Ryan, what on earth is going on here?" A woman in her 30s, elegant and sharp, stepped into the room. It was Claire Weston, Ryan's head of public relations, and if gossip columns were to be believed, the woman who hoped to be his fiancée. She glanced at Sophie and Emma like they were unwelcome guests who had wandered into a five-star hotel. Ryan turned his head slowly. "Claire, not now." Claire folded her arms, her tone cold. "Not now. Ryan, do you realize the damage this could do to media, the shareholders, if they find out you're harboring to vagrants in your home enough?" His voice was calm but firm. The kind of tone that ended boardroom arguments in seconds. "They're staying here as long as they need." Claire's eyes widened, partly from shock, partly from the finality in his words. "You can't be serious, Ryan. You don't even know these people. What if they're human?" Ryan interrupted sharply. "That's all I need to know." The silence that followed was thick. Claire's perfectly painted lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing more. She turned on her heel and left, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Sophie watched the exchange quietly, her hand absently stroking Emma's hair. She didn't know why this powerful man was defending them, but for the first time in months, she felt something she had nearly forgotten. Hope. Ryan turned back to Sophie, his expression steady. "You don't need to understand everything right now. Just focus on getting better." But as he looked at her, at the way her pale face held traces of strength, despite everything, he realized this wasn't just about keeping a promise to himself. This woman and her little girl were about to change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine.
Days passed and Sophie slowly began to regain her strength. The color returned to her face, her voice grew steadier, and for the first time in months, she could stand without her knees shaking. Emma, too, began to smile again, no longer afraid. to laugh as she explored the vast penthouse, her soft giggles filling spaces that had always felt cold and empty. Ryan found himself different. His days, once consumed by endless meetings and decisions worth millions, now started with Emma dragging him to the kitchen to help make pancakes, badly shaped ones that looked nothing like circles, but she was proud of them. Sophie, still fragile, would sit at the marble counter, watching, a faint smile touching her lips each time she caught Ryan pretending not to enjoy himself. The walls Ryan had built around his life, walls of glass, steel, and silence, were cracking. One evening, as the city lights flickered like distant stars, Ryan stepped out onto his balcony. Sophie joined him, wrapped in a soft shawl he'd ordered for her. The wind teased her hair as she looked at the skyline, her expression both calm and uncertain. "I still don't understand why you're doing this," she said softly. "People like you, they don't just rescue strangers and keep them in their homes. There must be a reason." Ryan's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Maybe I see something familiar in you. Maybe I see someone I once lost." Sophie turned to study him, curiosity in her tired eyes. "Your mother?" He nodded slightly. "She was like you, strong, even when life tried to break her. She told me once, if you ever make it, don't forget the ones who can't. I guess I forgot. Until you and Emma." Sophie's lips parted slightly, but before she could reply, a harsh knock echoed from the penthouse door. Ryan frowned, stepping back inside. When he opened it, two men in dark coats stood there, broad, intimidating, their eyes cold. One of them smirked. "Cole, we're here for the woman." "Sophie Lane, you've got something that doesn't belong to you." Sophie froze in the living room, Emma clutching her hand. Her face drained of color as recognition flickered in her eyes. Ryan's jaw tightened. "She's under my protection. Whatever business you think you have with her, it ends now." The man chuckled darkly. "You don't get it, do you? She owes someone. And people like him don't just forget debts." Ryan stepped forward, his voice like ice. "Then you can tell him he'll be dealing with me from now on." The men exchanged a glance but didn't push further, at least not tonight. They left, their warning lingering like a shadow in the room. As the door closed, Sophie's hands trembled. "Ryan, you don't understand. They'll come back. They don't stop. And I can't let Emma get dragged into this because of me." Ryan turned to her, his gaze steady, unwavering. "Then we end it, together." For the first time, Sophie didn't feel like a burden. She felt like someone worth fighting for. And deep down, Ryan knew this was no longer about charity, or even guilt. This was about protecting the two people who had unknowingly given him back something he thought he'd lost forever: his humanity. The following evening, Ryan stood in the dimly lit boardroom of one of his downtown offices. But tonight wasn't about business deals or corporate power plays. It was personal. Across the long table sat the man the enforcers had spoken of, Victor. Kane, a ruthless loan shark who hid his predatory empire behind a chain of charitable businesses. His cold grin stretched as he leaned back in his chair, sizing up Ryan with snake-like eyes. "I heard you've taken a liking to Sophie Lane," Victor drawled. "She owes me a significant sum. People like her don't just get to walk away." Ryan's voice was calm, but his gaze was like steel. "She doesn't owe you anymore. As of now, every cent she supposedly owes has been cleared. I bought the debt. You're out." Victor chuckled darkly. "And if I don't agree?" Ryan leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the room. "Then I'll make sure every fraudulent deal you've ever touched is exposed by morning. I'll have the IRS, the SEC, and every federal agency on your doorstep before sunrise. You'll lose everything: your money, your businesses, your name. Do you really want to test me?" The room went silent. Victor's grin faltered. He studied Ryan for a long, tense moment, then finally stood. "You're not the kind of man people say no to, are you?" Ryan didn't blink. "Not when it comes to protecting what's mine." Victor gave a reluctant nod and left, his coat sweeping behind him. The threat was over. When Ryan returned to the penthouse later that night, Sophie and Emma were sitting on the couch, waiting. The tension in the room dissolved when Emma ran to him, clutching his hand. "Are we safe now?" she asked, her voice small. Ryan crouched down to meet her eyes. "Yes, no one's ever going to hurt you or your mother again." Emma smiled a real, unguarded smile and hugged him tightly. Sophie watched silently, her eyes glistening. When their gazes met, something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, relief, and something warmer. Deeper something neither of them had expected. As the city lights glittered beyond the windows, Sophie whispered, "I don't know how to—" "Thank you, Ryan. You saved us." Ryan shook his head. "You and Emma. You reminded me what really matters. Maybe I needed saving too." The three of them sat together by the window that night, the skyline stretching before them like a new horizon. For the first time in years, Ryan didn't feel like the untouchable CEO or the hardened businessman. He felt human again, and as Sophie leaned her head softly against his shoulder while Emma drifted to sleep, Ryan realized something simple but profound. Sometimes the lives we save end up saving us. The end.